Good afternoon, everybody. Pigskin Pete here. Happy Monday to everybody. Today's video is going to be due upon request. Got lots of requests over the past several weeks asking my opinion on my projections for who is going to make the college football playoff. Now, right now is talking season at its best because everything's over. Training camp hasn't started yet. ACC media days, SEC media days, they're all finished and over with. All we can do right now is sit around and wait for practice to start. And of course, in less than a month, we get actual football. I couldn't be more excited, and I know you couldn't either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just break down each conference very briefly. I'm not going to get too in-depth because I don't want this to be a 30-minute long video, and I'm sure you don't have time to watch a 30-minute long video. So I'll break down each conference. A couple of teams that I pick have a chance, and then I'll pick the winners of the conference, and then I will project my picks for who will make it into the 4-team playoff. Now, every single year, one conference at least gets left out, right? I think last year, 2 conferences got left out because the SEC had 2 teams in there. Now, I don't expect that to happen very often. So for anybody, whether you're a Big Ten fan or an SEC fan, and you think that your team, your conference is going to get 2 teams in there, think again. That's going to be something that happens very rarely. We might not ever see it again in the foreseeable future. You never know, but I'm not predicting that. So what I'll do is I will start with the SEC. So my predictions for the SEC are simple. I'm never going to pick Alabama not to win the SEC as long as Nick Saban is there and as long as they continue to win the SEC every year. It's pretty much that simple. Now, I do believe that in the West, Auburn is the only team that even has a chance to challenge Alabama. I'm not a believer in LSU. Mississippi State may have a lot of talent. They have a new coach, and they just don't have the depth to compete with Alabama. So Alabama out of the West, and you already knew who I'm picking out of the East. I'm picking Georgia out of the East. I do think South Carolina will probably win 8 or maybe even 9 games in the regular season. And then, of course, if they win a bowl game, they could get to 10 wins, which would be really good for South Carolina. So this is not a knock on South Carolina. I know there's people out there all throughout the college football world and SEC fans from other teams who say that South Carolina could be the best team in the East, the dark horse to win the East. I don't see it happening. I just think that Georgia right now, personnel-wise and coaching-wise, are just still head and shoulders above South Carolina. I'd be very shocked if South Carolina won the East. I do think that South Carolina could beat Georgia head-to-head week 2 early in the season, but that's not going to mean that they're going to win the East. There's still a lot of football to be played after that. Now, so I picked Georgia and Alabama. They're going to meet in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. I'm picking Alabama for the same reasons I just stated before. Another reason is that I think that Georgia, they're not going to take a step back this year necessarily, but I do think that Georgia has really lost some key pieces both on offense and defense. So they're not going to be better than they were last year. I think they may be pretty close to as good as they were last year, but not better. And Alabama is just deeper right now. That could change next year. I think Georgia's time to shine, really, to be honest with you, is starting in 2019. At that time, you'll have probably Justin Fields starting, or maybe even Fromm still if he plays great this year. You can have more experience. They've been recruiting at a high level for the last 2 years. You'll start to see that pay off. So Georgia next year, I think, could be a legitimate shot to be a number 1 team in the country, but not this year. So I'm picking Alabama to win the SEC. Let's go to the ACC next. Listen, you already know who I'm picking for the ACC. I think that Clemson is just head and shoulders the best team in the ACC. I do think that the ACC is a much tougher conference to navigate through than it used to be, even as much as 5 years ago. There's a bunch of really good but not great teams, but they just don't have the depth to compete with Clemson. And I'm putting NC State, even Wake Forest, and certainly Louisville in that category. Wake Forest is an up-and-coming team. Their coach has won 8 games the past 2 years and is undefeated in bowl games. But Wake Forest is no powerhouse. They certainly don't have the depth. They will probably win 8 or 9 games again this year, I would think. NC State, same thing. NC State is capable of knocking off anybody on any given day in the country. But it's sustaining the whole season and trying to win 10 or 11 games and knock off Clemson in that division is virtually impossible. Florida State, I'm sorry. You're going to have a lot of talent left over from Jimbo Fisher. You're going to have a totally new style of offense in there. They could be better than people think they are. Willie Taggart runs that, up-tempo Oregon style of offense, and it's very run-heavy type of spread offense. So Cam Akers, they have the guy to do it. If Cam Akers stays healthy, that's the key to Florida State getting back to be in relevancy again. If they lose Cam Akers at some point due to injury, that would put a very big blow to their season. But again, Willie Taggart in his first year in a totally different style of offense, I don't think that he's going to be able to win that division. All right, so now out of the Coastal Division, Miami, I believe, is the best with coaching and personnel in the Coastal. Virginia Tech could challenge them. Virginia Tech is a big unknown. I'm high on Fuente. I have been since they hired him. He's going into his third season now, and this is when you're supposed to start seeing the return on investment, if that's the way you want to put it. They do have a really good quarterback returning. They're always going to have a great defense under Bud Foster, so that's not a question. The question is, are they going to be better than Miami? That'll be very close. I think that people, including myself, think that Miami top to bottom is a better team, but don't count Virginia Tech out. So anyways, I'm picking Miami to meet Clemson in Charlotte for the ACC championship yet again this year, and I think you're going to see a similar outcome. Maybe not a similar score. Okay, I'm not going to say we're going to beat them 31-3 or whatever it was last year, but we will beat them. They just aren't strong enough quite yet to compete with Clemson. Over the next year or two, that could change. They could get a lot better. I'm just not seeing it this year. So out of the SEC, we have Alabama. Out of the ACC, we have Clemson. Next, the Big Ten. Now, this is where it would be easier for me to go through this video and just pick Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Washington. And that would just be, the 5 best teams, of each conference. I'm not going to do that. There's got to be a little bit of a ripple here, and I'm going to step outside of the box of conformity to do this time. Obviously, Ohio State is the most talented, certainly the most talented team in the Big Ten, one of the most talented teams in the country. I mean, top to bottom, you could put their talent above Clemson if you really want to look at it, because they've had higher recruiting classes, since Urban Meyer's been there than Clemson has. They have a new quarterback coming in who's supposed to be really good, but we don't know how good he is yet until he really has put his feet to the fire. Michigan is the dark horse. I'm not buying Michigan. We all know this. Everybody is so high on Michigan. All they need is a quarterback. All they need is a quarterback. All they need is a quarterback. Well, we're going to find out this year if that's true or not. I'm not picking Michigan to even win that division, let alone the Big Ten. So, now, next we have Penn State in that division. This is my dark horse team. People are saying, Saquon Barkley's gone and they lost some pieces, so all of a sudden they're going to take a step back. I still believe right now, I don't even think this is a debate. Unless that Haskins kid out of Ohio State, it just ends up being lights out dynamic. Trace McSorley is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. James Franklin, in my opinion, is the second or third best head coach in the Big Ten. You have Urban Meyer, of course, Paul Chryst. We'll get into the West in a second. And then James Franklin. I think that Jim Harbaugh is the fourth best coach in the Big Ten. I'm picking Penn State to win the East. I know, I am in the minority. But like I said, it would be too easy just to pick Ohio State. I'm picking Penn State to upset and shock everybody and win the East. Next, we go to the West. Wisconsin, enough said. There's nobody in that division. Sorry, there's a bunch of really good teams in the West, not better than Wisconsin. So that puts Wisconsin and Penn State in my picks into the Big Ten championship, and I think Penn State wins the Big Ten. That's a shocking revelation, and I probably am wrong, but hey, if they do it, I'm going to look like a genius. All right, so that's 3 conferences down. Now we will go to the Big 12. Oklahoma is sort of the Ohio State of the Big 12. They have the most talent. They have the coaching. They have the depth. They have the whole 9 yards. I'm not going to pick Oklahoma to win the Big 12 this year. So, who does that leave with a possible chance to even win that division? Well, or that conference, I mean. Well, you have West Virginia as a dark horse. I still don't think they're better than Oklahoma. I just don't. Texas is a dark horse that a lot of people are liking to look at. I think that Texas is still another year or two away from winning the Big 12. I do think they'll improve this year, maybe win 9 or 10 games, but they won't win the Big 12. TCU. TCU is my pick to win the Big 12. We're just going to cut right to the chase. The reason I think that is that they're going to be better than Oklahoma this year is because the departure of Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray coming in as a first-year starter, and the fact that he's going to Major League Baseball, and the whole thing. And I think that TCU is going to take advantage of a slight step back from Oklahoma this year and win the Big 12. Next, we'll go out to the West Coast, the Pac-12, the worst conference in football. There's a few really, really good teams, and the rest of the conference is just terrible. There's a lot of coaching changes in the Big 12 this year, or the Pac-12, I mean. And the Pac-12 will be very interesting to watch. I will pay more attention to the Pac-12 this year than I probably ever have before, and watch more games that I normally wouldn't have watched because of the coaching changes. I think the Herm Edwards thing is interesting. The Chip Kelly thing is certainly interesting. And then, of course, Kevin Sumlin going to Arizona is a very interesting thing. And he's, sort of a quarterback coach, and he's got Khalil Tate, arguably, the most dynamic, maybe not the best quarterback, but he's a playmaker, and he's exciting to watch. So out of the South, I'm picking USC to still win the South because they just have more talent. And there's not Utah could be good. That's the other one I'm hearing a lot about, that Utah, this could be their year to sort of upset USC. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know the depth chart and every player on Utah and to make that determination. So just based on talent alone, I'm just going to have to pick USC to win the South. So the North, I believe that the North at this point is pretty cut and dry. Washington, I think, is the best team in the Pac-12. Of course, certainly in the North. Stanford has Bryce Love and a really good team, but I think that Stanford's going to drop a few games. It's certainly 1 or 2 more games than Washington does. And Washington and USC in the Pac-12 championship, and I'm picking Washington to win that. I think that they have the best quarterback in the Pac-12 as far as a passer goes. I think they have the best coach in the Big 12 by far. And it's just really a question of, if Washington loses week 1 to Auburn, can they run the table after that? Because if they lose another game during the season, that could leave the Pac-12 out of the playoff. So that'll transition us into the whole reason I made this video in the first place, my 4 picks to make the playoff. Number 1, I'm picking Clemson to make the playoff for the 4th year in a row. I think the Clemson schedule is very favorable this year. It's the easiest schedule they've had in, say, 4 or 5 years. They do have a tough road game week 2 at Texas A&M, but I still think Clemson is better team than Texas A&M, and I'd be very shocked if they lost that game. And really, on paper, I don't see them losing another ACC game. They may lose one to NC State, possibly Florida State, somebody like that. But other than that, I say 11-1 ACC champ getting into the playoff. So there's one. I think the Big Ten champ's going to get in. So now I went out on a limb and picked Penn State to win the Big Ten, so I can't back out of that now. So I'm putting Penn State in the playoff this year. So that's 2 teams. We already know the third one I'm picking. The most obvious, an 11-1 or 12-0 Alabama SEC champ is getting in the playoff. So there's your third. So now we have Clemson, Penn State, and Alabama. So one of these 2 conferences is going to get left out, right? Like I said before. Is it going to be the Pac-12 again, or is it going to be the Big 12? I'm sorry, Big 12 fans. Even though I think the Big 12 is a deeper conference and has better football teams than the Pac-12, I'm picking Washington as my 4th team to get into the playoff. And the reason I'm picking Washington is because they have an easier road than any team in the Big 12 does. TCU is going, even if they win the Big 12, I still think they end up with 2 losses. and you may have a 1-loss Washington team compared to a 2-loss TCU team, or even 2-loss Oklahoma if Oklahoma's the one that ends up winning the Big 12. In that scenario, I think that the playoff committee is going to end up picking a 1-loss Washington over a 2-loss anybody champ out of the Big 12. So there you have it. I'm sure I'll get some people on here disagreeing with what I say, and that's fine. I don't really care. I'm bound to be wrong, at least on one of them, maybe even two. It's very hard to predict. Every single year, there's some team that comes out of nowhere and shocks everybody and makes it in. And so, nobody really knows. It's way too early to be making these predictions, but it's still fun to speculate. So there you have it. Have a great day. Pigskin Pete checking out.